Hello there. If you've been paying attention, you know that the 70s, the 80s, and the 90s was the absolute best time to grow up. Now, everything wasn't peachy keen. There was political and social strife, just like today. But we had Saturday morning cartoons, the next Star Wars movie, and hanging out with our friends live to worry about. Now, today I don't wear rose-colored glasses, so here are some things, some 80s things, I know we're better without. I'm Victor, and straight out of the Gen experience, those mainly 80s things that, well, can just stay there. Those things that made it big in the big 80s, but wouldn't add anything to the 2025 landscape. Will you agree? How the heck should I know? This is my list, and I'm completely avoiding any life-altering illnesses or political unrest. We get enough of that today. So share your thoughts on those things that stayed behind that we're just not mad about.
They had their heyday in the 80s when nearly a quarter of all beds sold were water-filled. And while the novelty eventually wore off...
Sounds like a great idea. Or it did. But even the motion of the ocean couldn't keep this trend alive much into the 90s. The waterbed was novel for sure, and anyone could have one. Guilty. That's right, I had a waterbed in the mid-80s and I felt badass. But looking back, I never had one good night's rest. Any shifting weight during my sleep meant a slow chain reaction of waves, and by waves, I mean sloshing. Like surf hitting the beach, if the surf were liquid-filled vinyl sack. Not unlike a breast implant. I might be a light sleeper, but hitting the sideboard just woke me up constantly. Thank God I was young. How incredibly awesome to have one, I thought.
But not at all practical.
With some assembly required, it was an undertaking to get it all set up, situated, and filled. Feeling accomplished, you never let your guard down with the pets. Constantly on alert, you could imagine the devastation of one spooked cat and 80 gallons of water precariously contained in a wooden box in your upstairs bedroom. Oh, wonder if Jem had these issues when the new wave waterbed became available as an accessory. She was so trendy. When the novelty wore off, there was the inevitable draining of the beast. The deconstruction had you swearing off waterbeds for life, as did the rest of the world by the mid-90s. Of course, you can still find businesses who use this today. The local animal shelter, ma and pa printing places, or any government office. But should they?
If your business needs information quickly, your Xerox telecopier representative will show you how to do the trick.
They may no longer take 6 minutes to complete processing a single page, but the very idea of sending anything via a phone line should have gone the way of the dodo at the same time as this. Created right alongside the invention of the telephone, the fax machine didn't gain popularity until the 80s and into the 90s. Lucky for all of us, that popularity was short-lived, with so many more efficient ways to communicate or return necessary documents quickly becoming available. Does a fax machine really have a place in today's world? Waiting to see if your call went through, getting confirmation that the information was received, and when it wasn't, you had to do it all over again, hoping for a connection. For these reasons, we all need to be thankful for the arrival of high-speed internet and email, the things that actually hobbled the fax industry by the late 90s. Since no one actually needs to use a fax machine today, this is something from the Gen experience we're happy to do without. We would not be where we are without them, but looking back, file storage couldn't have been more fragile. The first time I really paid attention, it was when I learned you could trade the 5-inch floppy disk for underwear.
Do you know anything about floppy disks?
We'll talk about this in the bus, okay?
Well, no. See, the thing is, I got kind of a problem. Well, floppy disks are pretty expensive, and see, the thing is, I made a bet with my friends. Can I borrow your underpants for 10 minutes?
But that didn't really explain to a kid what they truly did. As time went by, these were replaced with the sturdier 3.5-inch hard plastic versions in a variety of colors. Of course, we kept calling them floppy, which made no sense, but neither does the save icon in Windows, still looking like that. Do kids know what that is? That's neither here nor there. Our storage has come a long way, and by the time the 90s turned into the 2000s, the disk had long flopped, replaced with thumb drives, or jump drives if you prefer. Now, hardware-free ways to share files exist, and with a lot less stress to keep this precious but flimsy storage safe. Tech can be helpful when not creating creepy AI of 80s franchises, passing off robot voices for human.
That's good.
Are you good?
Yes, I am good. I just said I was.
No, you didn't.
Or convincing us 6 fingers are normal. With no need for them and even a low rating on the nostalgia scale, the original floppy disk is definitely something from the 80s that are better off staying there. It's time to relax. Let's turn on the old 1980s console TV. Then again, maybe we shouldn't. You may have heard of Manimal or Automan, but Misfits of Science stood apart. They were all science fiction, but maybe the world wasn't ready for the Misfits brand of science. Or maybe it was TV that wasn't ready, because the special effects sucked ass. The comedy superhero sitcom was an idea that seemed right fit for 1985, complete with some innovative ideas and storytelling about teens with extraordinary powers. It sounds familiar. Alf's Max Wright, musician, actor, and fighter pilot Dean Paul Martin, son of Dean Martin, Kevin Peter Hall, who would go on to play the Predator and Harry from the Hendersons, and even some telekinetic chick character whom you might have heard of, Courtney something or other. They were all part of an admirable cast, but the show was canceled after 14 episodes, leaving the 15th unaired. Anyone clamoring to see the lost episode of Misfits of Science? Or are we all just better off leaving that relic of the 80s as something we can do without? Long distance calls and the expense to make those calls has been around since the dawn of telecommunication. But on New Year's Day 1984, a monopoly held by AT&T's Bell system was broken up and split into smaller individual companies, allowing for more competition in the phone wars. Did it help long distance calling? Not that I'm aware of, I let my parents deal with that. It just meant more companies could charge out the nose for long distance. There were more options and a variety of plan choices, but it was still expensive, and no matter how you sliced it up, rates could be astronomical, and the limitations on calls were frustrating. These premiums were one of the biggest epic tragedies of the 80s. All the companies might have been jockeying for your business with their so-called better rates, but because flat rates weren't an option, this whole long-distance calling plans and prices are cemented as a thing of the past and not welcome in today's society. And anyway, phone companies today have found new ways to bend us over. As for this past business as usual, it didn't make it through the 90s when mobile phones began to take over. Smoking was a fact of life. We didn't give it a second thought. We all just got it secondhand. Well, especially if your own dad smoked a pack of Pall Malls every day. Thanks, Dad. In the mall, the car, even at school where teachers lit up in front of students, there was no shame. Faculty lounges looked and smelled like swanky airport VIP lounges, and students, mostly high school, did the same, in designated areas on campus, of course. Seeing a teacher or a student bum a cigarette from one another was not uncommon. But truth be told, even back in the 80s, it seemed strange that anyone thought a random planter in a restaurant or a thin veil of cloth on a plane somehow was an adequate divider between the smoking and the non-smoking section. Whether or not we were all used to walking through a cloud of poisonous gas or having our clothes have that unmistakable scent of burned tobacco, smoking on a plane, while you ate in a restaurant, or at the doctor, all seems like total madness today. And for that, smoking indoors and smoking sections live firmly planted in the past. And by the end of the 90s, things were changing, to the relief of lungs everywhere. Now don't get me wrong, I have a huge soft spot for a landline. Yup, a phone in the house. There's something charming about that simple device that, without any extra accoutrement, couldn't tell you who was calling, and allowed us to disconnect for a while. Unable to be reached 24/7 and forcing us to lift up a receiver and make a true life in-person call to somebody else. But this isn't about the phone per se, it's about the cords, the corded phone. People talk a lot about how dangerous growing up in the 80s was, like they're shocked we're still alive. But they always seem to fail to include the phone cord on the list. Who of you can't relate to walking around holding the handset with the supersized cord, turning corners, going up the stairs, and winding around support beams? We just wanted to roam, be unchained, and get some privacy. Mom could still follow the cord and find you talking to your crush from the floor in the closet. The cord can stay back where it went extinct. No, the phone is not from the 80s, but the extra long cord that created barriers for families to duck under or hurdles to leap over is certainly prevalent of the time and deserves to stay there. When the cordless came into being, you couldn't get better than that. Not only could we roam, but it was harder for someone to find you, or better yet, listen to your phone call, unless they picked up the other extension. You could constantly be on the move. The cordless device left the long twisty tether in the dust, even if we missed twirling it around our bodies and between our fingers. Now this one might be controversial to some of you, but I'm saying paper maps. Oh, it's not that I don't love them, I do. There's a lot to love about perusing a huge paper map in the car on a road trip, all the little towns, the points of interest to discover, unfolding and finding the roads to help navigate your pilot. But it was also a nightmare of multiple maps, various unfurled tactical drawings that never get folded back quite the same way, circles and markings made in color pen on an out-of-date version, and flipping over these mammoth posters blocking the view of the driver. Because of this, you could still be stopping at the next roadside attraction, not to see the giant jackalope, but to buy a current map for the state you drove into, or even, God forbid, ask for directions. You might even need to call your destination to get detailed information before you move on. It wasn't until 1996 when MapQuest made its debut that we questioned how did we manage so long without it. But by this time, and certainly today, we definitely can live without our Rand McNally. As that online service has been joined by Here, Google Maps, and others, paper directions have only become a novelty. The maps are a time capsule, a collector's item of sorts, while we relish in being able to be directed to our target with just a few simple clicks. And finally, the coup de grace. Having to heed everyone's threats, feedback, or face complete collapse, New Coke was deemed a failure and Coca-Cola Classic returned to the shelves. Coca-Cola's rebranding itself was the epitome of 1980s capitalism and marketing, and we are all better without it. The junk food staple had tried too hard to attract the Pepsi fans by alienating their own. Not wanting to waste all those advertising dollars, New Coke would go quietly into the 90s, disguised as the forgettable Coke 2? An alternate option for those few dozen people who may have enjoyed the new taste. Even with no profit margins to speak of, Coke continued to save face by selling Coke 2 until 2002. Hold on! Does anyone remember seeing this on the shelf, offered in a store or restaurant anywhere? I certainly don't. Perhaps it was a special order. Nevertheless, they were throwing away money while the popularity of the original recipe and even the status of Diet Coke already gave them the top spots. New Coke was an atrocity, a crime against nature and humanity, and deserves its painful death. This is definitely something very 80s we're better off without. And I know all of you recognized everything on this list, but how many of these 80s things do you agree we're better off without? I'm sure you can think of some others, but like I said, I wasn't going to dip my toe into social or political content, like the shadow of the Cold War, the fear of the doomsday clock, or actually dying of AIDS. I could have probably also added referring to flip-flops as thongs as something very 80s that can also rest in peace in the 1980s. But that is something very regional and would make sense only to most West Coasters or Australians. Anyone else call them that during the Gen experience? Let us know. There's little to tarnish the days of my youth. Even growing up in a time that gave us so much memorable content, I can still find things that not only belong there, but we are better without today. Please share with everyone your thoughts on the matter. If you think I deserve a like or subscribe, don't wait, do it now, and come back for more great content from the channel. Thank you all for being here. I appreciate it. There's so much more awesomeness ahead. So until next time.